The Corsairs of Umbar expansion is coming soon to the Lord of the Rings Online, and today we have the pre-patch that includes the new Mariner class. Most other features of the expansion are actually going to be a part of the expansion and the Umbar content. So compared to Gundabad, this expansion pre-patch has fewer system updates. And let's jump right into the patch notes. So first off, this update is coming out later today. The maintenance is probably not finished by the time this video comes up, but we see new key art for the Corsairs of Umbar expansion and the logo with that. There are some interesting details, but I'll save that for later. And again, the main features of this patch are more information releasing Tuesday. This is probably going to contain all the expansion pre-order and what you get with the bundles, and probably even details on how you actually access the new Mariner class. So all of that will be in its own dedicated video, and I'm probably going to stream this pre-patch this evening and make a new Mariner character. So outside of the Mariner class, there are a few system and important gameplay changes that we'll get to, and a whole bunch of other class changes, some updates to the Forester event, which hopefully will actually come back and actually not be taken away once again. And then there are a few other things, but again, main feature being the Mariner. I will also point out this pre-patch is on October 3rd, and what's kind of interesting is if you look at the Fate of Gundabad pre-patch, this was on October 13th, about 10 days later than we have. So we could potentially expect the expansion to be in early November, perhaps around 10 days earlier than November 10th. And if we look 10 days earlier, that's actually November 1st, and a lot of LOTRO patches and updates come Tuesday and Wednesday, this update being on a Tuesday. In addition to that, if we look at the 2023 event schedule, you will see that they have put in here with here it is, legendary item level cap increase to item level 515. Well, the maximum level that we're even ever going to have for the level 140 cap is actually 499, so 515 is the first tier associated with level 150, and what you will have at the 141 reforge. Why they would add that to the game before we can actually get to that level, I don't know, but this is another big hint that November 1st could actually be the planned launch date for the Corsairs of Umbar expansion. And again, based on how Gundabad was released, that date does track. And we'll probably have all these details confirmed later today. Maybe with future expansions, Standing Stone Games will actually announce dates for things ahead of time and build some excitement for not only the expansion itself, but also the pre-patch as we have here, which was never officially announced, but sort of unofficially confirmed by the community manager in their weekly stream. But that pretty much just leaves us with the update 37.2 patch notes, which I finally do want to get into a little bit more details on the Mariner for people that maybe are less familiar with the class. So Mariners are going to be a melee class. They have a support blue line that's focused around buffing, and then a red DPS spec that's focused around damage and DPS, and then they have a yellow line that's a little bit more utility and support with more of a focus on debuffs rather than buffs. Now, I have a lot of videos dedicated to the Mariner if you're interested in checking those out to learn more about their gameplay mechanics and all that sort of stuff, but they do have a lot of systems going on for themselves, and it's a fairly unique class with all the different things they have brought together, even if you see a lot of familiarities sort of stitched together from other class mechanics, but also with a bunch of new stuff to definitely make it its own thing. So with all that, the Mariners will have to deal with a balance system where you can go forward or aftward, just as you would on a ship. It's pretty thematic for the nautical class where you don't actually have Navy combat and LOTRO, but you can go forward or aftward. If you go too far one way, you will actually become unbalanced. Again, just like a ship, you would actually just fall off the ship in that case. But then they also have swordplay, which is a combo-like system where it's more of a sequence of abilities that you use. And as they say here, each of your swordplay skills will give you a short buff that will enhance one or even more of your other swordplay skills. Only one of these swordplay buffs will be active at a time, so you do have to chain certain abilities in a certain sequence to actually get the combo effects. Personally, I am very excited for the Mariner and trying it out both in low-level gameplay and high-level gameplay. I will probably be using a Valor boost in some form on my Mariner, at least as the current plan, as well as leveling one fresh. Two of its specializations are of course going to be focused more so on groups with the blue line buffer spec and the yellow line debuffer spec, but you might find those have some interesting utility and survivability aspects that can perhaps be good for solo. We will see when the class is out and we can actually play it some more. Otherwise, the red line is probably going to be the de facto solo spec as a just straight up damage dealer. But for now, that's enough about the Mariner, and again, I encourage you to check out my videos covering the class in greater detail if you're interested. otherwise, I do want to talk a little bit about the class changes and some system changes actually coming as we progress towards Umbar. And one of the big things that Standing Stone Games has been working on is doing a lot of normalization between the classes and their effects and just how they work in game. And one of the big things we have coming here for Umbar and with the Mariner class is actually going to be how buffs and debuffs work. So a lot of different debuffs here. We have Oathbreaker's Shame. The breaking of Thangoro Gem is actually a new Mariner skill. It's like the Mariner Oathbreakers is how I once described it. We also have Murder of Crows. That incoming damage debuffs, these no longer stack with each other. So when you use one of these very strong cooldown based debuff abilities, you will get an effect called Renewed Defenses now. So you won't be able to apply one of these, as they call them, potent debuffs here, from being applied for a little duration. So if you're in a group with multiple of these classes with all these debuffs, then you will need to actually coordinate when you apply them. And on top of that, for Caustic Brew, Ancient Craft, Caustic Brew being a new one with the Mariner, Ancient Craft being Lore Master, and Trickster being Burglar, these will now apply what they call Major Rent Armor, and you cannot stack those effects. And guess what? If there's the Major version, there's going to be a minor counterpart. So Pitch Pot, another new Mariner thing, and Sticky Tar from the Lore Master, these will apply what they call Minor Rent Armor, and those won't stack with each other as well. Now, something they don't actually mention, I noticed in the patch notes here, is that a lot of the Mariner blue line abilities that give your allies buff also won't stack with Captain Redline abilities. As they say here, it's a direct counterpart to the Captain's Master of War Redline, so a lot of your abilities and buffs won't be able to stack with the Redline Captain's buffs. That is something that is important to be aware of that isn't explicitly stated in the buff interaction section here. Another thing that I do want to point out as we start getting to some of the class changes that you might notice is another system change they are bringing to class mechanics is that a lot of skills that bypass mitigations are now going to have different effects, or traits rather. In this case, with the Champion and Hunter are the ones I am seeing right now. So for hunters, they used to have bodkin arrows, which would cause your attacks to ignore mitigations. That's now a completely different effect with induction skill damage for that trait. Champions also had Champion's Advantage. That will now increase blade skill damage instead of causing your blade's abilities to ignore enemy mitigations. It is also good to see the specification of how a debuff like Trickster from the Burglar works. So Major Rent Armor will be reducing all enemy mitigations by 10% for 20 seconds. For Lore Master, you actually see that the effect is different. It's going to be 5% of enemy mitigations. That said, with Lore Masters, they actually do have a little bit of a special effect that makes it further different than the Burglar's Trickster version, and that it will actually increase the mitigation reduction to 15%, but only for 10 seconds, but then it does taper off to 10%. So the ultimate effect over the long run is going to be 10% reduced mitigation, but of course when you apply Ancient Craft, that will still allow you to get the 15% for 10 seconds effect. So there is actually between the two classes here, and whatever the Mariners looks like, I don't remember from the beta because I barely had a chance to play our 2 beta rounds. There is actually some differences and inconsistencies between the different classes, even though they all have a consistent debuff effect that they apply. Whether that's a good thing or not, I will let you all decide, and let me know what you think in the comments. And finally, last thing related to all this that I do want to point out is Murder of a Crow's debuff is going to be 10% mischance, but now gives a 20% incoming damage debuff, which I don't believe is quite up to the power level of Oathbreakers. That is, if I remember correctly. Oh, and actually one more thing here with the Burglar, they snuck this in, must have gone stealth mode when I was going over this. Location is everything is also not going to bypass enemy mitigations, and it now increases critical chain skills damage instead. And alright, with all that out of the way, we can finally get to some of the more regular class changes, which, hey, we see here with Beorning that there are some bug fixes. With champions, you will notice a pretty significant buff with 20% increased damage for their strike skills. Those are more the single target ones from Redline, and then the AoE ones from Yellowline with your blade skills, those are increased by 8%. Meanwhile, with those champion buffs, we have a Guardian nerf because I guess their damage was too much for Standing Stone Games, so they had to reduce their damage by 5%. There is also a pulse rate limiter on bolstering blocks now at 1 per second. Also, along with the champion buff, there is a buff for the hunter. So for most of their skills, regardless of type, it looks like that's going to be increased damage by 15%. And now for the Forester event, the developer who has been working on this posts some background information on basically what went wrong with the Forester event and why it's had to, say, be canceled, I think at least twice now. But it looks like they have a solution that's going to have it function a little bit different than it initially was intended. And it's now going to be run on a timer of every 21 minutes you can participate in the Forester event, but that does mean the syncing issues they had have, or at least should be, solved. I like that they put should be here rather than a guarantee they have been solved. Another thing players should like is that movement bonuses are supposed to be suppressed, and now they should be. I also find it interesting, and shout out to a kin member for pointing this out, Stands in the Fire, that Guardians were able to bypass the speed restrictions in the Forester event with Sprint, while Guardians don't actually have an ability called Sprint. They have Charge, or Brutal Charge if you're in the red line, instead. So it seems like they bypassed their class restrictions to gain an ability from the champion to bypass the speed restrictions in this Forester event. I'm guessing they mean that Charge, though. You can no longer use that as a Guardian in this. Alright, and the one big quality of life change that I've seen a lot of people requesting is that the Forester tools from this event are now going to be account bound instead of character bound. I will point out there still are going to be completely unique tools available from this event that have effects like increase, I think, chance of getting rare materials. So if you are a gatherer, they're pretty much just the best for gathering and getting rare materials. In the expansion, we might see some new tools with different effects than that, but if that's what you're looking for, these are going to be the best tools from that, only available from this event for now. Looks like a few bug fixes here, but I still find it interesting how a lot of the River Hobbit animations and the such use Race of Man versions, and some of them have been updated even throughout the beta and by the time they were released to Hobbit versions, so they now use the Hobbit versions of Cheer, Laugh, which includes Lol, Mock, and Wave. Honestly forgot that Mock was an emote. I don't know if that's one you have by default, but I gotta try that to remember what it looks like. And finally, it does look like there are a few known issues with the Mariner class, with some of the skill tooltips listing wrong durations and some more tooltip issues. There's also some class deeds not properly advancing, but hey, it does have some impact, but it doesn't really matter all that much anymore for character progression with that great class trait point change that came with Before the Shadow. I know I always repeat this, but I still think that's one of the best changes to ever come to LOTRO. There is also a note on the advance and sweeping advance for that matter, swordplay mechanic, saying that it will give you a dramatic flourish critical magnitude buff, and what that really means is it just increases the potency of the critical rating buff from dramatic flourish for blue line mariners. And as promised, I totally didn't forget about this. I was going to take a look at the wallpaper art for Corsairs of Umbar. So first of all, the first thing I noticed is how bright, warm, and actually naturey it is, with a little bit of a more tropical look to the vegetation. Even a little bit just makes me think of a jungle, kind of like if you play World of Warcraft. The type of zone I would envision this area being in is actually Stranglethorn Vale. I know Harad, which Umbar is in, is supposed to be more like a desert, but I don't necessarily know that all parts of Harad are described exactly as like a desert in the source materials. And actually, if I remember correctly, in Far Harad, this would be like further south, that there are jungles, which kind of matches if that area was actually originally designed to be kind of like Africa, the northern extent of Africa. That makes sense because below the Saharan desert, there is of course more jungle rainforest type areas. In fact, if we look at it on Google Maps, this is pretty much what it looks like: desert and then more tropical. But I believe Scenario, one of the world builders, mentioned Turkey as a place that at least some of the Umbar landscapes is perhaps inspired by. So if you're familiar with what Turkey looks like, then that's something you could potentially see in game. I am honestly not the most familiar with the physical geography of Turkey, but it's of course going to be varied. It's a large country. But you know, at this point, those are just the details that we have. Otherwise, the first thing that I was actually drawn towards was not the nice, bright, warm sunset or sunrise colors in the ships and the city that I believe this would be like Umbar. I don't know if this is actually the city of Umbar that is being shown here, or if it's even one of just the island cities that we might venture to. My eyes were not drawn to that. They were actually drawn to the very Viking looking dwarf. He looks like he came down from like probably White Mountains actually. I believe there's some story stuff that I haven't gotten to that of course you have the White Mountain dwarves, and I believe they're involved in the story. But anyway, that's probably where he's actually from, but it just not really what I was expecting with a very Viking looking dwarf when we have more of, say, pirate theme nautical class with the mariner, a seafarer here. Also, is it just me or is this mariner a lefty? I think in game you can only play righty, right hand dominant characters, but he looks like he would be a lefty the way he draws sword and dagger. Also, have to appreciate the feathered hat, and I'm sure Dan's Adventures is looking forward to acquiring that. Anyway, that is enough for this video, and I know I'm very excited for the Mariner class to come out and for us to get more details on the Corsairs of Umbar. Let me know what you think of the Umbar pre-patch, and if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and thanks for watching everyone.